Right. Let's talk about the coverage of women's football on social media. Now, I use social media often, a bit too much, but that's another subject for another day. And I come across some articles about women's football by certain publications who are mentioned by name later on in this video. And I think to myself, the stories that these publications put out there isn't a positive about women's football, but rather negative. But they think that they're doing women's football a solid by talking about women's football, but they're only talking about the negative side. For instance, maybe something to do with sexism or Alicia Lehman or equal pay or whatever, or whatever a woman's footballer. Oh my god, I'm about to get in the neck now. But anyway, whenever a female foot that sounds even worse. Like I don't know when someone involved in women's football says that women and men should have the same pay, and a certain publication puts it out. I mean, of course, the reaction will be like, "Oh, women's football makes far less money than men's football because people don't watch it," and that's fact. But I'm not going to talk about that because what I'm here to talk about is how certain publications talk about women's football, or rather, and rather, how they put women's football out there in negative light. Okay, I'll mention the publications by name now: Sports Bible and Joe.co.uk. Now, these are publications that don't talk about women's football very often. They don't report anything about women's football very often. And I think to myself that, okay, there are both publications that don't talk about women's football often because the majority of their followers aren't fans of women's football. So, yeah, so why would they? But then I come across some articles from both publications which put women's football in a bad light. And I'll give you an example. I mean, we've all heard about the Eni Aluko story, which she subsequently had to apologise for mentioning Ian Wright in controversial light. And I can't remember exactly what she said, but she said something along the lines of Ian Wright is blocking women from having an opportunity in football. Like, that isn't what she said at all. She's just paraphrased by using Ian Wright as an example. Like, that's not what she said at all. But you know, the media just twist things like that just to suit their own narratives. But there we go. And this narrative of women's football is spun by the likes of Sports Bible. And I think to myself, for a publication that has a large following that doesn't follow women's football, why would you then post that when you know what the reaction would be? Like, hang on, I'm just going to pause there so I can think. Yeah, so the point of this video is to relay the importance of showing women's football in a positive light, as you would do for the men's game. Like, the likes of Sport Bible and Joe.co.uk, they have a large male following that don't really look at women's football as anything serious. So it's just beggar's belief for me that either publication would would largely mention women's football when something bad happens, or when when a female footballer says something like, I don't know, that men and women should be paid the same, and then they'll post that, knowing the type of reaction they'd get. I'm sorry, but that's not doing women's football a solid. If anything, that's just making women's football look worse. Like, f- thinking about it though, for me, I don't know. It's a difficult one, honestly. Like, I think to myself that publications as such should do better to put women's football in a positive light. And for me, at the moment, they're not doing that. Like, for instance, at the weekend, Arsenal beat Lyon to qualify for the Women's Champions League final for the first time in 18 years. Post about that. Seriously, do stories on that, because that's good for women's football. Like, Arsenal woman reaching a first European final since 2007. That's a story. Like, that's great news. Like, Arsenal are history makers again, by the way, and I hope they win. But again, that's the point I'm trying to make. Post more good news about women's football. Like, don't just post about women's football when something controversial happens, or when someone involved in women's football says something that will garner a largely negative reaction from a largely male-dominated audience. But that's just my two cents on that. But seriously, publications as such really need to do better when they're talking about women's football, because we know that women's football is getting more popular, but by only talking about women's football when someone says something controversial is doing the product of women's football a massive disservice. And that's where I'll leave it. But let me know your thoughts. How can publications such as Sport Bible improve the name of women's football? Like, do they need a complete overhaul of their women's sports section? Let me know. I mean, what are your thoughts on the coverage of women's football on social media? It can improve in many ways, but I've said enough now. So let me know what you think.